I don't know what to do with my demon child. I think therapy is incredible. And by doing therapy, uncovering the reasons why we have the reactions that we do, and practicing how to change those reactions is monumental. It's like you are not going to nail it the first 500 times you do it. But, be open and be honest, work on repair, all of that kind of stuff.
I've heard there are three people that you should never, ever lie to. And it's your doctor, your attorney, and a therapist. So there's a lot of things I want to unpack there. But first, I want to introduce you. Thank you, Dr. Ladd, for
Thanks for
doing
having
the
me.
podcast with us.
Yeah.
Tell us first about your practice, who you are, your background.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in northeastern Pennsylvania and grew up in a tiny town. My parents were both physicians, and I had two younger sisters. And after college, I went to the University of Scranton for undergrad, went to Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska for medical school. And in my last year, I met my husband while we were there. And I did not want to go back to cold weather and did not want to stay in cold weather. And so we ranked MUSC in Charleston number one for residency, and so ended up being at MUSC in Charleston for 5 years. So 3 years of adult psychiatry and then 2-year fellowship at MUSC, and I was chief resident my last year. And then we ended up landing in Greenville, and I've been in private practice ever since. So I see children and adults. Typically, the youngest I see is about 3, and I'll see people all the way through the lifespan. I also have my husband with me now, who is my psychiatric nurse practitioner. So he was an ICU nurse for 10 years, and then after COVID went back to school and got his psych NP, and so we worked together.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which has been really, really great. So,
but it sounds like if you have parents, both doctors, and did you know you were going to be a doctor your whole life?
That's a great question. I very realistically saw what life as a physician looked like. So it was definitely
so you saw the good and the bad.
The good and the bad, yes. The great things about it and the not so great things about it.
Never seeing your parents around.
Yeah. It was definitely different. My dad was internal medicine, so he was like the old school doctor, like did all his own inpatient, did all his own outpatient, was on call like every third weekend. So like I have lots of memories of sitting in the hospital like while my dad's doing stuff. And then my mom.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was great. And then my mom is a dermatologist, and so she was very busy in her outpatient. But my parents had a great childhood. My parents were awesome, but very realistic with us too, of like, if this is what you don't want to do, this is not, know what this lifestyle is like. Yeah.
In the 90s, I watched a lot of Chicago Hope.
Yes.
And wanted more than anything to be like a cardiothoracic surgeon.
Yes, because it looks awesome.
It is. And for me, it's fascinating because the human body is the most complex thing.
Yes.
And one of my friends in college, her dad was a cardiothoracic surgeon. She said, he's great father, but I never see him.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, let's find something else.
Yeah.
Plus, opting out of the 12, 15 years of
It's a lot of
schooling afterwards.
Yes. It's a lot of school. And I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I initially went into medical school thinking I wanted to be an ENT surgeon. I had shadowed
sounds fun.
Yeah, I had shadowed a lot of ENT surgeons when I was in college and when I was in high school, and I just loved the OR. I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And then, medical school is a very humbling experience where you're with the top people from universities from all across the country. And it's challenging. I mean, like, we're going through a class in college that was a semester in 2 or 3 weeks, and then you're being tested on it. So it's just a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
And so the first 2 years were not my favorite, but we survived. And then your third year, you rotate through the hospital and you do all the different specialties. And psychiatry wasn't really on my radar. My mentor from the time that I was a first year med student, and she's my mentor and friend to this day, is an amazing consult liaison psychiatrist named Dr. Malin at Creighton. And
what type of psychiatrist?
A consult liaison psychiatrist,
okay.
Yeah.
What is that?
So what those psychiatrists do is they are based in the hospital. And so if there is a psychiatric consult that's needed, they actually go in and do it. So they are very adept at the medical side of things and how that impacts the psychiatric side of things. And she's brilliant, but she's also just like one of the most incredible physicians I've ever had the privilege to watch. And then she was my mentor. She was one of the most life-changing people I've ever had in my life. She was just incredible.
And that was what made you start thinking
and so I was like, well,
seriously
maybe
about
I could
psychiatry?
do this whole psychiatry thing. And then in my third year, while we were doing my psych rotation, I just loved it. I really found it interesting. It never felt difficult to study the information. Like I really enjoyed learning about it. I've always, I grew up loving to hear stories and people's stories. And I'm half Irish, half Italian. We do a lot of storytelling.
See, you've got your story film
We
now.
got a lot of stories. And so that really drew me into it even more because you get to hear so many vast stories, both good and bad. And so I really, really, really enjoyed it. And then my two favorites after my third year were pediatrics and psychiatry. And so I kind of ended up leaning on the psychiatry side and said, well, I'll just do child psych because I really loved pediatrics. I've always loved children. And so that's kind of how I ended up going that route. So going from ENT surgeon to
Very different routes.
very different route.
It seems like a lot of other educational experiences should kind of be a little bit like that with medical school. Let's give you a taste of everything you can do. My kids is, my son is a senior in high school and my daughter's a junior. I don't think they have any idea what they want to do.
No, yeah, it's
but
hard.
it would be cool if there were like, a residency of all the different choices.
Yeah.
Because I learn what I like by doing.
Totally agree. And I think, also I did my surgery rotation in January in Omaha, Nebraska, and it was in the hospital at 3:00 in the morning. And
What
didn't
you
get
thought you wanted to
home
do.
until 9:00 at night. And I never saw daylight for like 2 months. And it was cold and it was dark. And it was like, my respect for surgeons just grew immeasurably. They work so hard. Their hours are so intense. And I also knew I wanted to be a mom, and I just couldn't. I mean, I know there's amazing
hard to
female
blend.
surgeons that do it, and they're rock stars. I don't know how they do it. They're incredible. But that was also
That's a hard
difficult.
That's hard to
yeah,
blend.
to balance that.
Well, that's an interesting route to get to where
Yes.
you're at. So
Yes.
I want to go back to the cognitive discipline,
Yeah, conscious discipline.
conscious discipline.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so essentially what it talks about, and I hopefully the conscious discipline people out there who are listening to this do not think I butcher it, but to kind of give an overview of it, essentially what it talks about is kind of this two-piece approach to parenting, which is a lot of our job as a parent is to regulate ourselves, especially in challenging moments, because we're using mirror neurons to teach our kids how to regulate themselves. So that's way easier said than done because we've all been in situations, like I always give the example of my toddler's throwing a fit in the Target clothing aisle and literally flailing about. And it's really hard to keep yourself composed and calm.
You need to shut down that scene right away.
Yes. So while that is going on, big piece is we regulate ourselves, and that helps children learn how to regulate themselves. But then the other piece is learning how to approach kids and when to do it appropriately. So what I mean by that is there's different stages of our brain. We call it the red zone, the yellow zone, and the green zone. So the red zone is kind of our most primitive part of our brain, and that tends to be when kids are flailing about on the Target floor, screaming, yelling so intensely. And what we tend to do as parents is that tends to be when we chatter the most. So you can't be doing this right now. Like, why are you acting this way? Like, what's going on? Let's just calm down. So we chatter. And what we don't realize is they're in their deep fight or flight mode. They're in that deep primitive cortex. They don't hear anything you're saying. And it just tends to escalate us as parents, and it tends to escalate the child. And so it tends to make everything worse. What conscious discipline is really trying to help us get our kids from that deep primitive part of our brain up to the cortex, where then you can have more conversations with them, where they can be more receptive to what you're saying. And so it's teaching our kids how to regulate that vast variety of emotions that we have. We all are going to feel anger. We're all going to feel frustrated. We're all going to feel annoyed. But it's, how do we get from that intense emotional reaction to moving into our cortex where we can calm ourselves down and be rational with it?
I would also suggest that they don't just not hear what you say, they don't see when you're texting. Because
Yes.
with my daughter last night, that's kind of what it was. It was an escalation of texting
Yes.
that should have stopped earlier, and then I did stop because I was like, this is not going anywhere.
Right,
And
right.
on my drive out here, I was like, how could I have done that
Yeah,
better?
yeah,
Which is why I wanted to listen to.
And so, like, Becky
Kennedy
does a lot of that. So conscious discipline, like the famous conscious discipline book is Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline.
I would also say that, like, even if you butchered the definition, what you just said now is apt, useful, relevant.
Very, yes.
And sometimes we take ideas externally, and through our own experience and knowledge can make better use or same use. I like the way you described it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really puts a lot of onus on us as parents because we have to learn to regulate. But then, the biggest part about from a kid standpoint is I think sometimes where conscious discipline, it's also called gentle parenting. It has a lot of different names. The biggest misconception with it is then you don't have boundaries with your children, and it's not permissive parenting. And Dr. Becky talks a lot about this. It's not permissive parenting. You are still setting rules. You are still setting boundaries. You are still implementing those rules and boundaries, but you are not deregulated. You're teaching the kids how to do that in a regulated way, which, gosh, that would be fantastic to have a generation of regulated kids become regulated adults, and then because we know that translates so much into every aspect of our lives as adults, and we all know adults who are not good at regulating their emotions either. So that's kind of the background of it. It's much easier said than done. Another big piece of it that I really resonated with is this thing called repair, which is you are often going to fail as parents, and that's okay. But the biggest thing is once you are in a more calm state and the child is in a more calm state, being able to be like, hey, I'm really sorry. I lost my cool and I shouldn't have reacted that way. And I'm really sorry. And I hope you can forgive me for that. So also teaching kids that we can make mistakes, but that we also take ownership and can apologize for the way that we reacted or our actions.
I've taught my youngest, my 11-year-old, that I think, to me, that is one of the most mature adult-like behavior.
I agree.
Is apologizing, being accountable, and owning, because we all do overreact and make mistakes from time to time. But if you just kind of are so embarrassed about it that you brush it off and never mention it again, you're not teaching them to own it. And you're not teaching them that that's not okay.
Absolutely. And it's way easier said than done.
Yeah.
And it's it's a really hard thing to do, but that's kind of our goal.
I will say, like, when you realize, and this is not necessarily only in a parent-child dynamic, but any relationship setting where you messed up and you have to account for that and admit that, it is one of the hardest things to do.
Absolutely.
But usually the other person is so sometimes shocked
Yeah.
that you are facing that, or just appreciative that the reward afterwards is great. We've healed, we've repaired this.
Exactly. I think it's an amazing, we'll call it like cognitive theory and parenting approach. And I do think it's very challenging. So I'm an elder millennial. So it's challenging.
I like that title.
Yes, I'm an elder millennial raised by a boomer, by boomer parents. And so it feels very counterintuitive to us. And then to our parents and to their, older Gen X, boomer generation, they look at it like, oh, you're just letting your kid do whatever they want. And why are you trying to do this? It can look like you're not parenting at all. And it feels, when you first start to do it, like very strange. Because, a lot of it is like parental control is kind of, not that all boomers did that, but there was a lot more like, I said it, that's the way
There's
it is.
There's the discipline component
Right.
of the boomers that they nailed
Correct.
really well.
Correct.
Then there's the lack of validation and lack of empathy.
Correct.
And I think the later generation swung too far with the pendulum.
Absolutely.
And when you balance both,
It works.
That you can have empathy and validation, and you can have discipline.
Correct. Absolutely. And I think so sometimes
But you can't do that unless you're regulated.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing. And so sometimes like grandparents and stuff may look and be like, what is this? I got that feedback from my own parents. Like, what are you doing here? What is this? But it does work. It does
It
really
also
help.
doesn't work when you tell your parents, this is why I
Yes,
messed up.
yeah, no, that does not go over well. That does not go over well. But yeah, it's and then what we see is a lot of the trajectory that I feel like I'm dunking on boomers, and I'm not trying to, but in the more
No, they got a
they got
component
a
very
component
well.
very well. But what we saw then was, okay, well then there wasn't as much open communication because you didn't want to face the consequences. So kids just learned how to be really sneaky. And so they would just learn how to go around their parents and present a certain way, but behind the scenes, lots of stuff was going on. So our goal is really to create emotionally regulated kids and adults who could have open and honest conversations while also having strong boundaries and consequences for actions and natural consequences for actions and discipline. But so we're trying to blend, like you said, I love that, the best of both.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That's kind of the goal.
So that is a really fascinating and interesting and strong framework to work with, helping individuals in a counseling setting. Can you describe what brings a patient to your office, and then how do you incorporate that with also the training from psychiatry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll talk about kind of our kids and teens, and then I'll talk about our adults. So, for all of our patients, we see everything from ADHD, autism, anxiety, depression, bipolar, substance issues and substance-induced psychotic disorders, tons of OCD, TBIs. I mean, we really do kind of see a wide variety of different situations. So typically, there's kind of a couple of ways people come to us. One of the most common is they're seeing their pediatrician or their internist or their family medicine doctor, and they've tried a couple of things in their arsenal that they feel comfortable with, and they're not getting the results that they need. So they will refer them to us to see if there's anything else that we can offer or other suggestions that we have, or do we have the right diagnosis? Are we making sure that everything looks copacetic? So that's one way that we get referrals. Another way that we get patients that come to us is we have, in Greenville, where we live here in South Carolina, we have a wonderful therapy community, very smart, very talented therapists and psychologists. And so sometimes they will be working with a patient and they will refer them to us for evaluation and treatment. And so that's kind of another way. So really, we're kind of the next. They've typically gone through the first steps and then they come to us. Other ways that we tend to sometimes get patients is we're treating, child, and the mom or dad are like, oh my goodness, I struggle with that same stuff. Would you be willing to see me? And so sometimes that's also how we
How
get
many
people.
adult ADHD diagnoses come after diagnosing the child?
Quite a lot. Quite a lot.
My own included.
Yes, quite a lot. That's kind of the ways that we see people. I consider myself a pretty conservative physician in the sense of I believe in a holistic approach to a patient. So I'm a strong proponent of therapy plus medication management, and always using the minimal amount of medicine to get the best results. And also just having a team approach. I trained having very strong relationships with the therapists and the primary care doctors, and we collaborated and all that stuff. And I feel like that's so important to treating a patient. I have great relationships with therapists and primary care doctors, and it's not uncommon that we will collaborate on a case just to make sure that the person is getting the best approach. So I'm a big believer in all the holistic methods, which, exercise, sleep, healthy eating, vitamins and supplements and therapy. And then also when it can be helpful and needed, making sure that we also have a good medicinal psychopharmacology piece too.
So not knowing that I was ADHD when I was in college and high school, I just kind of had to figure out what worked. And a lot of it was exercise, nutrition, regular habits. Mm-hmm. But at least when I was in college and law school, had I known and medication were available, I could have, because I'm inattentive. And so I either very hyper focused on the things that I'm interested in. So if it was a class that I really liked, I would know everything about it. But if it was just something I had to take to get the credits, I got a passing grade.
Absolutely.
And if I had known that, medication could help, I could have done much better in school and some jobs where I wasn't interested in, but there really is kind of a value to all of the different ways of
Absolutely.
holistic treating.
Yeah, so that's kind of my philosophy, and I think I trained at MUSC. It was a phenomenal program. We were very strongly trained in psychopharmacology, but we were equally trained in therapeutic modalities as well. So, when I was in fellowship, I got to see PCIT, CBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and then on the adult side, I did psychodynamic, CBT, ERP. Like we really DBT. We were expected to be looking at the whole person and really be adept at both sides.
So when an individual comes in, how do you, what process or what indicates to you that maybe it is, habits that need to just be fixed, or sleep, or nutrition, or how do you go through and determine?
Yeah, so
what
I mean,
people
I think
need?
it always starts with just a really good history, both from the patient, the parents, the therapist, like the entire team, and just really having a good idea of the picture. If they're a kid or a teenager, school, like what's the school saying? What's the feedback from the school? And also just forming a relationship with the patient. So our intakes are typically an hour, and so we spend a lot of time with the kid or the teen or the adult and the family, and really try to understand what's going on. No matter who the patient is, I always say, like, you got to stick with the basics. Like, we got to get enough sleep. And I mean, my teenagers hate me for that, but I'm like, sleep, 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 making sure we're getting water. I always say, like, I'm not expecting you to do a CrossFit workout, but like, we got to be moving our body in some way. I also know it's really hard, especially with little kids who are picky eaters, but trying to eat as little processed food as possible and trying to eat a whole diet. So like, that's like advice we give everybody regardless of who walks in.
It's crazy how important the basics are.
Yeah, the basics are. And then just making sure we are doing the basics and then seeing what else we can add to help enhance.
Well,
all of
that's
that.
good, because like I would think, if you go into a doctor with a broken arm, you want to know immediately what's wrong.
Right.
But mental health is different.
It is.
There's a process. You're not going to walk into your office, get, what the diagnosis is and the treatment plan, and then you're set. This is a process that's going to take some time to work through.
Yeah, it's very fluid too. Things do not stagnate as much as, maybe in other aspects of medicine. And what I mean by that is like a broken arm. So broken arm, this is the treatment. Okay, you're good to go. There's ebbs and flows, and different things appear at different times. And, I think that's where the relational piece of psychiatry is so beautiful, but also so valuable. And that's what I really enjoy about it, is I get to know my people, and that's awesome and such an honor. But that also helps me be the best that I can in treating them. So it requires constantly kind of being fluid. It was once described to me that psychiatry is an art, not just medicine, because there's a lot that go into it. I think what's really cool about psychiatry is the technology is getting so amazing. Like, we're in the era of the brain, and all these new technologies and options that are coming out are amazing.
It's crazy how much more we know now than
10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it, at its core, still is about the relationship and really knowing your patients and viewing them as a whole person.
You say that it kind of requires the relationships, and how differently would you treat like a child as opposed to a parent with ADHD? Or is it the case that with a child with ADHD that you kind of also need to help the parent with the child as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love taking care of kids and teenagers. They're like my favorite. And so like just talking to them kind of like I would any kid, just to get to know them. Like, what are their likes? What are their dislikes? They keep me cool. I use that in giant air quotes because I am not cool, but they keep me on like what's hip and happening in the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, which is fun because they think I'm not cool, which is why they find me entertaining. But like, I really enjoy that. So like just talking to them, just kind of to get to know them at all. And then, usually if they just feel comfortable with me, they'll open up about other things. And I always tend to ask about what I think are kind of key pillars of a kid or teen's life. So how are things at school? Like, how are we doing academically at school? How do you like your teachers? Do you feel like you're understanding the content? How are friends and relationships with friends? How are things at home? How are things that you enjoy? So whatever that may be. And so kind of easing that into conversation. But I love my kids. They're so much fun.
I've got a dumb question.
No, that's not at all.
So if I think it's dumb because it's obvious for adults, I think, but for kids, when you say, how are you doing with friends? How are you doing with school? When I hear symptoms with ADHD, I think like it's all of them, but I never thought that they could be doing really well in school, but it's their friends' relationships that are maybe not excelling, or family members.
Right, yeah.
Do you see, is
absolutely.
that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ADHD is, I think it's fascinating because it's almost like a spectrum. The variability is so different. And I see so many kids who are brilliant and they knock it out of the park when it comes to the academic side of things. But then there's just sensory stuff and social cues that they don't pick up on, and they blurt when they're in front of their friends. And so sometimes it just makes awkward situations that way, or at home
Are they aware of that, and are they concerned of it? Or they just don't care?
As they get older, they become much more aware. I mean, I think always my littles, you definitely have some who are very hyper aware, which typically there's an anxiety piece there as well. But you have others who are just like free flowing and they are not aware. But typically as there's more cognitive awareness and more sense of self and how the self is different than others, that like not everybody is the same as me. And once that awareness becomes more apparent, they start to recognize, oh, wait, I'm turning people off, or wait, I'm not having as many friends, or wait, I'm going to the principal's office, or the teachers are irritated at me, so there starts to become, I think, more awareness as they get older. Russell Barkley, I am a huge girl of Russell Barkley. He came and talked to my class of fellows at MUSC, and it literally was like the most amazing 2 to 3 hours of my life.
He's very articulate.
Oh my gosh,
and takes a lot of the complexity and makes it very simple fast.
Yeah, he is unbelievable. If you ever had the pleasure to hear him speak, it's...
No, just YouTube.
Oh my gosh, he's unbelievable. He's pretty much retired now, but he was incredible. And something he said just really stuck with me, which was, kids with ADHD are about 2 to 4 years behind same age peers in executive functioning skills. And so it helps parents understand it a lot more, and kids kind of understand themselves a lot more. So for example, like that tends to mean like they might gravitate towards younger peers, or their interests might gravitate towards interests that don't necessarily seem on par with kids of the same age. It catches up as brain develops, but they might be a little bit more immature. And so sometimes I feel like the biggest divide in that is once you hit middle school. Like in elementary school, they're all kind of immature and they all are kind of at the same level. But then as you hit middle school, that's where the divide seems to get more extreme, because you have kids who are very mature and kids who are out partying and sexting and doing all this other kind of stuff. And then I have some of my ADHDers and some of my more immature kids who are playing with Barbies and Pokemon cards, and so there's more of a divide.
Well, because you're hitting right where they're going through puberty. Right. So some are really accelerating into adulthood and others are lagging.
Yeah, and so that 2 to 4 year executive functioning difference can also become just so much more apparent in those middle school years. So a lot of what we do is form good relationships with our kids and try to get to their level and talk to them as individuals, but then also just coaching parents, talking to parents, seeing how to best support them, temper expectations, like what's something that's appropriate to be concerned or worried about, and what's something that maybe is unrealistic, and how do you balance that?
What do parents worry about that you would think maybe they don't need to so much? As a parent, I kind of feel like every bad decision I make is just going to totally mess them up.
That is, as a fellow parent, I totally understand that. And I think that's such a...
But what would you tell me, Dr. Ladd?
That's a great question. Brett, it's okay. We all make mistakes, right? There's that meme that's like, I just try to make enough money so I can pay for therapy for my kids as they get older. That's kind of...
I haven't heard that one, but I love it.
Yeah, there's truth to that. I think at some level... our kids are our most important things. I mean, we all just adore our children and we want what's best for them. The reality is we're all human beings, and it's something we do, or no matter how hard we try, at some level we're going to make massive mistakes or small mistakes, and it's going to have implications on them. I think this is where it comes back to repair and having that open and honest relationship with our kids. That, at some point, if my son comes and sits down with me and says, like, Mom, you pushed me really too hard and it made me really anxious, that I can take that in and not get defensive about it and be like, I'm really sorry it came across that way. Like, I was trying to just make sure I pushed you to be the best you could academically, but I'm really sorry if it seemed like taking ownership and not trying to invalidate what he's feeling. So I think this is where repair comes back in. So, like, accepting that we're all going to make mistakes, accepting that we're also, and kids will understand this too, especially when they become parents, we all are just doing our best. And sometimes our best is flawed, and that's okay.
I want to go back to
conscious discipline.
Conscious discipline. So, I think the best thing a parent can do is give their kids the tools to develop their own ability to regulate their own emotions. And because if you don't, kids won't learn. Oftentimes, will not learn that, and then they bring those skills or lack thereof. And that inability to regulate their emotions to becoming an adult. And it's really hard to develop as an adult.
Yes.
But let's just say there's a listener that is like, you know what, I cannot regulate my emotions. Like, didn't have the best example, but I want to fix that.
Yeah.
How hard is it even possible for adults that are in late 30s, early 40s that are, I want to get some more ability to be calm myself. And I've never been calm before.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's never too late. We know the brain is highly neuroplastic, even through adulthood. No, it's not as neuroplastic as it was when you were 5, but neuroplasticity continues. I mean, just to have somebody say something like that is monumental, and that's huge, and I would applaud anybody who feels that way. I am a huge fan of therapy. I think therapy is incredible. And by doing therapy, uncovering the reasons why we have the reactions that we do, and practicing how to change those reactions is monumental. I often talk to parents about, like, it's a lot of practice. Like, you are not going to nail it the first 500 times you do it. But, be open and be honest, work on repair, all of that kind of stuff. But it's just keeping practicing, because the more we practice and focus on making those neuronal connections change, it will get easier and it will get better as time goes on. And a lot of the things that we do to help calm us as adults, and we also recommend in kids, are mindfulness techniques. So meditation, visualization, progressive muscle relaxation, breathing, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's never too late. It's always possible to regulate and learn to be better regulated in our emotions.
The hardest part is probably just making the decision and having the self-awareness
that there's a problem.
Yeah,
or that I want it to be different.
Yeah.
And I don't, like, I've actually done a couple talks, and that's a question I often get is, like, I didn't have a good example, and my parents, I feel like I'm really dysregulated, and it's really hard for me to then regulate for my kids. What do I do? And so I'm like, therapy, be gentle with yourself and just keep practicing. And also, while you're practicing, focus on repair. Because that's the biggest thing. Is, like, you can go and say, Mommy's really trying or Daddy's really trying. I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it, and I'm really sorry. Because that right there is just teaching that we're going to screw up, but it's important to say that you're sorry.
Yeah. That is interesting, because when I think about my parents, like, I knew that they were always doing their best.
Absolutely.
Like, even when tempers were lost.
Yeah.
Like, I knew that they cared about me and they loved me, and they were doing their best. And then it's funny, because as a kid, you think that adults are just superhumans.
Yes.
And then you grow up and be one, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
We're just normal people that have the same problems with a little bit more experience at dealing with them.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually, a common developmental thing is the shattering of the illusion of the perfectionism, especially of your parents, where all kids, and I think there's an element of that is protective, viewing your parents as superhuman. They're perfect. They're doing everything right. And I think that point where you realize that they're human beings and not superhuman varies. Like I think for some people it happens in teenagehood, some people it happens in 20s. It happens at different times.
It happens as a teenager and then they know nothing.
Yes.
And then you graduate college and you're like, oh, they did know a lot of things.
They did know a lot of things, and they weren't trying to just be annoying. They were right. And I think there's then a whole other level of respect that you get once you become a parent yourself, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is really hard.
This is way hard.
This is really hard. And they did try really hard, and so, yeah.
And my children are not like me. They're not like my siblings. I'm given these
No.
these
These
people
very
to
unique
raise, and I
people.
have no experience with this
Yes.
type of personality and interest.
Absolutely. Yeah. So parenting is the most humbling and incredible experience that anybody can have.
It's funny because I remember I was easy in some ways, but hard in others.
Yes.
And I remember my parents saying, I hope that you have a child just like you. And I'm like, I do too.
Yeah. And then you
I know
get
how
one.
to deal with that.
Yes.
But sadly, I got completely different.
Yes. Yeah. That tends to be what happens. But no, it's an incredibly humbling experience. And it's not for the faint of heart at all.
You like stories. So
Yeah.
tell me a really good story of a kind of a patient success or one that always kind of brings a smile to your face.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many patients that I just absolutely adore and just really love. I think I finished my fellowship in 2018, so some of my patients have been with me since then. And my favorite thing is to see my kids grow up, like in front of I get like teary-eyed, gonna get really emotional. Because I get to see them grow up like in
They're
front
your
of me.
kids.
They're like
It's like-
mine. And it's amazing. And to see then my kids go off and do these incredible and amazing things, it's such a privilege and it's such an honor. But there's just too many to name. It's incredible to see the growth of some people and just how the resiliency, the growth, the hard work that people put in and see it pay off.
Are there types of patients or situations that are more challenging, that are like, I barely know where to begin with this?
Oh gosh, absolutely. I think that's, all medicine is hard and painful at times and exhausting and emotionally taxing at times because you're the other person and, dealing with that. Psychiatry is incredibly unique. I don't think I appreciated that as much going into it or was fully as aware of how emotionally draining, exhausting, tormenting at times it can be. There have been, over my years, some incredibly challenging patient situations that have been challenging just because they're sad, and I carry that home, or because they're scary. And that does weigh heavily.
That has got to, because you seem to me as a very empathetic type person.
Yes.
So dealing with the types of challenges
Yes.
that you have to bring that home, that's got to be hard. Is there any way have you developed things that are like, this is how I come home to
It's gotten...
I could turn the computer off at work.
Yes,
and then
that
go
doesn't
home.
happen. And especially because we're private practice, like I'm always on call. I think what I did not realize or recognize was when I was in training, we would do supervision hours multiple times per week. So we would have probably 3, 4, 5, 6 hours where it would be individual or small groups of us where we were running cases. And yes, we did run cases. But there was a lot of therapeutic benefit to that I didn't fully grasp until I was like an island unto myself and didn't have that as much. And that actually was wonderful. And it really did de-escalate and help put in place some of the challenging cases that I had. And then coming into private practice and not having that was really challenging. And I very much struggled with setting boundaries of when to turn the computer off, when to not answer to an email, how not to, what's an emergency, what's not an emergency. I am notoriously bad at working, overscheduling myself or putting people in places that I shouldn't. So I'd like come in at 6 o'clock in the morning or, come in on a day that I was off and like, let's see a patient, let's do this. After having 2 kids and seeing that I wasn't necessarily having the emotional energy to put into the people that mattered.
It's a lot of bandwidth.
The most, which were my kids and my family and my husband. I needed to kind of do some. I'm still not very good at this.
No, it's hard to be a really good doctor and a really good parent at the same time, or a really good parent and a really anything at the same time.
It is incredibly challenging, and so I see a therapist a couple of times every couple of weeks, which has been amazing. It's kind of replaced what that was, and
kind of takes the weight off.
Yeah, she's amazing, and it's really helped kind of mimic what I did in training that was so powerful that I didn't even realize was so powerful. So it's helpful to kind of be able to have that person to be able to talk to about some of these challenging cases. I have amazing.
First of all, that is really fascinating. And I don't know how many people think about the fact that, like, our doctors are the people that help us are also human and are going through things.
Very challenging, and I am highly committed to, like, I will be sick as a dog and I will come to work and see patients. And there have been very few times I've had to call out. And if I call out, I am sick or, like, I've had surgery or, like, whatever. And it's very hard for me to do that. Some patients are so understanding about it and some are so not.
Yeah.
And some get very angry at the concept. And I think they forget that, like, we are human beings, and so we also have human being needs. That's also very hard.
That's also really hard for you to be able to address kind of from a professional perspective, because, I mean, you have your own boundaries and you have your own needs, but you're dealing with someone that, to me, looks like they're having a hard time self-regulating and understanding other people, being empathetic, really.
Absolutely. So that has been something that has been a big work in progress, I would say, over the past, 12 years now since I started residency. So I've gotten better at placing boundaries in place, not great, better. Trying to pull back more and not just realize I am one person and there's only so much that I can do, and trying to just kind of recognize that. And also just not being so hurt or taking it as personally if somebody has a reaction to, like, I do have to take off or I do have surgery. Like, I always give the example. I had my son when I was in fellowship, and I actually went into labor while I was working my last weekend on call. But my daughter I had when I was in private practice, and I was planning on taking about 6 weeks off. I ended up only taking about 2 weeks off and then was back in the office, and I was working the entire 2 weeks that I was off.
That's a lot.
That was a lot, and that was because I had a really hard time just not engaging with that. And I'm sure there are people out there like, Dr. Ladd needs a lot more therapy. Putting boundaries in place.
So I was 42 when I got this gem of advice that I could have used way earlier from one of my really good law school friends. I was going through a hard time just venting to a friend, and she said, you don't owe anyone an explanation.
Yeah.
Like, why are you telling, like, make your decision. You don't need to justify it to me. You don't need to explain it to me. It's fine. You don't owe anyone an explanation.
Yeah.
And so for you to say to a patient, I can't, or we need to change the schedule for whatever reason. I mean, that may not be the best example. If you've scheduled an appointment, I would want an explanation. But I think sometimes we go too far.
Absolutely. And I also have one of my very best friends from residency is always my reality check. So she'll call me and be like, Mary, you're being an idiot. Like, so she'll just tell me flat out, which I adore her. And
everyone needs a friend like that.
I appreciate that so much. Like, she does it in the most loving and amazing way, but she'll look at me and be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, you're right. What am I doing? So yeah, I feel like I'm getting better at knowing my limits, because then I'm also not as good of a doctor if I'm burned out. And last year there were some big safety concerns that happened and very big patient challenges. And I think that also just kind of made that more pressing to just kind of work on boundaries and knowing my own limits and knowing when to call things and not.
And it's good to be able to identify those.
Yeah,
earlier.
absolutely.
And I think that kind of goes to why you said earlier psychiatry is more of an art than a science, because while there are definitely science variables to it, environment, genetics, neurobiology, there are so many variables.
Absolutely.
That, like, just trying to be aware of all the variables and tie them in that only time and experience are going to be able to do that.
100%.
And artists
Absolutely.
get better with time.
I love that. Absolutely. Yes. Very true. Very true. Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier once you start seeing, like, you may be like, I think this is this, but then as you get going, it's really not. It's maybe like
Absolutely.
hiding something else.
Absolutely. And I talk about the onioning effect, where sometimes we treat something and it unmasks another layer, and then it unmasks another layer. And so it's not uncommon to see that there's lots of pieces to a puzzle. And this is where having the team approach and really having a great collaborative relationship with other treatment team members is so important, because I might pick something up and then somebody else might pick something up. And when we put the two pieces together or three pieces together, we're like, okay, that makes so much more sense. And so that's why I couldn't imagine doing this job without having great collaborative relationships.
Is it fair to say that maybe there are a few onion layers and then you get down to it and there is a core issue, there's a core problem to try and help resolve, and while there may be other things, there really is one thing that's going to help this person the most?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say that exists?
I think that definitely, and there are some people who have multiple diagnoses. There are definitely some people who have, for example, autism, ADHD, OCD, and bipolar disorder. I have, some like that. Or there might be somebody, and they legit have all of them. And that's why going down and digging really into the core of what it is, you're like, there really are 4 individual things that are here. That's just an example. So for certain people, I think you dig through the layers and you're like, this is it. This is this one thing that's really causing it, and I've really narrowed it down to this. And then I think there's other people, you dig through the layers and it's just so complicated, and you do realize it's so complicated because there are different things.
Yeah.
And it can be different psychiatric diagnoses plus medical conditions and all this other kind of stuff. So that's where you have to be really judicious in going through things and really thinking through all the possibilities. And that's where being, really taking the art and then the science and putting it together really are so important.
I had heard once that, like, there's a stigma associated with being labeled with a mental condition. But if we were to look at it as, like, what we've done is we've identified patterns of behavior that exist with autism, patterns of behavior that exist with someone with depression or ADHD. And once you label it, once you identify it, there have been proven successful treatment patterns in dealing with that. So it's not so much the label that you're looking for, but, like, once you do peel off a few layers of the onion, now we know a lot of things that work.
Right.
And we may not know exactly which one works, and we're going to try a few, but now we can help because we have identified that.
I totally agree.
Because you wouldn't treat a person with depression the same way necessarily as autism or
Correct.
bipolar or
Correct.
schizophrenia.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, the DSM is a phenomenal guide, but the reality is not everybody fits into a perfect DSM criteria. And so
Right.
quite often that's the case, is they don't exactly fit something. But I love the way you put it. There are certain signs or symptoms that tend to coalesce with certain diagnoses, and these specific treatment modalities tend to yield high benefit. And so I think then that's sometimes maybe a better way to frame it, is not necessarily like the diagnosis and this is it and this is the only solution, but like, this seems to be the fit and this pattern seems to be what's going on, and this treatment I think could be very beneficial.
Yeah, 'cause I've known some people that, for a long time they had some treatment, probably not as much as they thought, but they were initially diagnosed with bipolar.
Yeah.
And then enough time goes by and you're like, no, these are symptoms associated with schizophrenia.
Yes, absolutely.
And the medication that we've been giving them for bipolar is very not effective for
Sure.
schizophrenia.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do see that things can become more clear over time. And the more, once again, like the more you have a good relationship with the patient and the family and the treatment team, the more that we can get the most accurate diagnosis.
And that's why the intake is so important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I've heard there are three people that you should never ever lie to, and it's your doctor, your attorney, and a therapist.
Yes.
Because in all of those situations, you're paying them to help you with your own best interest.
Yeah.
Friends, family, spouse, kids, everyone else, bosses, like, yes, people care about you, but they're not employed and hired
Correct.
to be concerned for your best interest. And if you lie to your therapist, if you lie to your doctor, if you lie to your attorney,
Doesn't help.
they cannot do their job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you come in for an intake,
Be honest.
put it all out there and be
Yes.
honest.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will often say my diagnosis is only as good as the information I have.
Yeah.
And so if it's colored a certain way, or if I don't have all the puzzle pieces, it can be really challenging to be accurate. So, and that's with any field
Yeah.
of medicine.
And then it's relying on the patient to be self-aware enough to be
Correct. Or, and
I
that's
was trying to be honest.
right. Absolutely. And that's sometimes we're having that is where the treatment team could be so valuable, or if it's like my teens or my kids, or if they're we call them poor historians, having family members be there that can be accurate historians that could be like, okay, that's not actually what happened. This is what happened. Invaluable.
So would there ever be a time where you're getting information from a patient that just, there's some cognitive dissonance, there's something not gelling? Would you ever ask for outside, like, can I talk to a friend? Can I talk to a family member?
For
Is
sure.
that appropriate?
Absolutely. And, if somebody is over the age of 18, then we ask, is it okay if would you be open to signing a release of information for me to talk to your mom or your dad or
you
your
don't trust me?
therapist? Or exactly. And, and kind of how I always frame it is, I'm just trying to understand you more and just want to get more information about you. And so this would just be helpful for me. And
So you don't trust me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Brett's trying to be my challenging pushback patient. Most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, people were like, yeah, absolutely. Just hand me the paperwork. I'm happy to sign whatever you need me to.
And the ones that say that are the ones I really need to
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so most of the time, I'd say it's not a problem.
So you had said that your husband is the nurse practitioner?
He is, yeah.
How do you work together copacetically, or what is his role?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my husband Taylor was an ICU nurse for 10 years, and COVID was really difficult. The specific ICU that he was in got hit incredibly hard.
Imagine, geez, yeah.
Yeah, so they were essentially like 4 nurses to a patient, 4 patients to a nurse, and the ICU nurse was trying to run drips and lines, and then there's people dying all over the place. So it was really difficult. And, he just said, I just don't think I can do this anymore. So he went back to school and got his NP. It's actually been fantastic. He's wonderful. My patients really love him, especially like my teenage boys think, he's a dork and he's adorable. And so, they find him very endearing. And he's really talented at it, and he's really good at it. So
Talented at being a dork?
Totally that too. Very much so. He'd be mad at me for saying that. He's not dork. He's awesome. But how we kind of do it is...
I feel like I probably could relate pretty well. And my son, I'm imagining if it's like the video games, the Star Wars, and the Lord
totally.
of the Rings,
We are
all of that.
Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. Yeah, we're into all of that stuff. Yeah, we're full dork level. It's okay. It's all right. He is incredibly smart and very brilliant, but I also trust him implicitly. So typically how it works is every new patient, he checks out to me. And he essentially acts as like my resident. And so he goes through the entire history and does the entire intake with me. And then we discuss a treatment plan together. So usually I'll set it. I usually say, like, what do you think? And 99% of the time I'm like, I totally agree with that. And that sounds like a good plan. And then, as he continues to see his patients, I trust him a lot. Whereas if he's like, I don't quite know what to do with this, can you weigh in on this? He's great about doing that. And then also sometimes we'll just do an intake, or he talks to me about a patient, and I'm like, this one needs to come to me. It's just a little too complicated. It's just a little too much. Like, we're going to put them on my schedule.
That sounds really awesome.
It's fantastic.
Because, when
great.
I think of a lot of other practices and some of the therapists that I've seen, like, I've never seen that kind of dynamic, and 2 heads are better than one, and like 2 That's really cool.
Yeah, it works really well. It's been awesome for our family too.
Does he take some of the problems home with him?
He's a highly sensitive individual as well. He probably does it. It might be because he's still fresh, and he's not a decade or more into this yet. But he does a better job at compartmentalizing than I do. But he still is highly empathetic and cares deeply about his patients. And so there are definitely times where I'm like, okay. And it's good to be able to check each other in that regard. But it works really well for us, and it's been awesome for our family. Like when he worked in the hospital, essentially he would kind of be stay-at-home dad during the week, and then I worked during the week, and he would work all weekend. So it was a lot of like passing in the night. And so this has been really nice because we have way more family time together, which has been really great. So like he actually is home on weekends and holidays, which is awesome. And there was a long period of time where neither of us were, and now
where's his family?
So his family's all over the place.
Okay.
So he has some family in California, some family in North Carolina. My family, like my youngest sister is in Charleston. She is doing her 3rd fellowship because she is a glutton for punishment. And then my middle sister is here in town with my parents, and then the rest of my family's in Pennsylvania.
Away from the cold. Oh, not all.
Yes.
Some of them
wanted to get away from the cold. Yeah. So my parents and my middle sister are here. So yeah. So it's been good.
And Greenville's actually
it is a phenomenal city.
It is way cooler than I thought.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in that way. I've come out here for some work, and like the downtown, there are
awesome.
restaurants from everywhere. They are amazing. It's one of those like perfect small towns that have enough of the big city, but are still 100%. Small.
We love it. I'm sure a lot of people from Greenville, if they hear this, would be like, please downplay it because we don't want any more people coming. But
I have actually heard that.
Yes.
Like we try and keep this
We're
secret
trying to keep it
ourselves.
on the down low. It's an amazing city. I mean, we have a lot of cultural events. The food scene is wonderful. The art scene is fantastic. It's great because if you want a really big city, we're about 2 to 2.5 hours from Atlanta, about an hour and a half to Charlotte. And then, Charleston is about 3 hours away, and then the mountains are right here. So it's kind of the best of everything.
It's funny because I'm a Lincoln Park fan.
Oh, you and my husband would get along incredibly well.
They have songs for every emotion.
They do.
And they are powerful.
Yes.
But they're not coming to Atlanta on their tour.
They came to Greenville.
I have tickets for that
show.
So I will be coming back in 3 weeks.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing. Like we're gonna go see Chris Stapleton is coming in June. So we get Andre Bocelli was here.
How are you going to Greenville and not Atlanta? Come on.
Yes. Well, we're up and coming. We are cool.
I see.
We are cool. Yeah, Andre Bocelli was here. There's been some really cool stuff. And then we have the Peace Center, which gets all these cool shows. So we're going to go see Tom Segura in a couple of months.
He's hilarious.
Yeah, like Theo Von was here. Like there's been it's a great city. We love it. And great schools and all that kind of stuff.
Lots of pollen right now, but
it is not ideal.
Yes.
From an allergy perspective, if you do have terrible allergies, this is one of the worst cities for allergies.
But it's only like a couple of weeks, and then it's better, and you don't have to deal with 4 months of snow in Pennsylvania.
That is very true, and let me tell you, that's pretty fantastic.
So my family's from Salt Lake, and so I grew up with the 4 seasons, but the on and off again snow forever.
That's so bad.
And I love visiting my family during like Christmas or the holidays, New Year's, and going snow skiing for a week.
And then saying bye.
And then you understand this.
Yeah, I say bye. It was really great for now. See you later. Yeah, we grew up in kind of the Scranton area of Pennsylvania, so we were about 2 hours from Philly, 2 hours from Manhattan. But I didn't realize that it wasn't gray for 10 months out of the year in most of the other parts of the country. So like I came to Charleston and I was like, it's winter, but it's bright out. Like this is insane.
You're still getting the 4 seasons.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So we are very lucky that we're able to go visit family that are still up there, and Pennsylvania still has the best Italian food in the entire country, hands down. So yeah,
that's good to know. I did actually have a trip to Pennsylvania once, and my friends there took me to an Italian place. I didn't make the connection.
Oh, it is. I
was thinking Philly cheesesteak, and they're like, no, let's go.
No, we're going to get Italian food because it's the best in the entire world. It's next to Italy. Yes.
That's on my bucket list. You said that you like travel.
our family loves to travel. So my husband should be here right now. He's gotten into credit card points and miles and stuff.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we do a lot of that is how we travel. But I've always loved to travel. Some of my favorite memories being a kid was going on vacations in the summer and traveling to all these new places. And so that's something that we really enjoy doing. So we like to travel with our kids.
Do they like traveling?
They are the best travelers, way better than I am. They handle it beautifully, and they've been to some pretty cool places already.
So what's one of the coolest places, and what is on the bucket list?
Oh my gosh, there's so much on the bucket list. But we just got back.
Okay, I'm giving you 500,000 Sky Miles right now. You can go
Yes.
anywhere.
Oh,
Where is that?
Oh, this is such a tough one. Oh my gosh. If I could go anywhere. Well, I love Europe because I love art and all that good stuff. So I probably would say, oh my gosh, I would love to see Prague. That's kind of on my big bucket list. I would also love to go to Portugal.
Okay, yeah.
And do all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we love to travel. So our next big trip is we're introducing our children to Europe through a Disney cruise up the Mediterranean.
That's a really good blend.
Yeah, we're going to see how it goes. And then our other big trip this year is we're going to a dude ranch in Colorado, and we're going to play Yellowstone and ride horses and do all that kind of stuff, which will be very funny for anybody who actually knows me personally. I'm sure they are cackling right now thinking of me at a dude ranch, but I think it will be really fun.
You're broadening your horizons.
We're broadening the horizons, and then our big trip for next year is we are taking my parents with us to Paris for a week.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so we're really looking
food
forward to
there is
that.
amazing.
It's awesome. So we're really excited. So we love to travel. There's still so many places I want to go, but that's
Yeah.
kind of one of the things I look forward to, and it helps break up work. So I'm like, okay, like I got this next thing to look forward
And
to.
you really are separated, because if
Yeah.
you're on a cruise,
Right.
there's no
We
there's
still
no
like
cell
there's
cell
not
phone
as not as
reception,
great.
really.
You know, the kids also know like mom and dad usually like have like 30 or 40 minutes or an hour every day that they have to do work, and they have just been trained that that's just kind of what happens, and they're great about it. So yeah, but we love to travel. It's been really fun. We went to Costa Rica earlier this year. We got stranded in Costa Rica. It was fun. it was not recommend. It was very stressful.
So there's a story there.
There is a story there. Yeah, the snowstorm, and I use that in air quotes, that hit Charlotte. They canceled the flights.
Oh.
So we drove across all of Costa Rica, 3 flights later, and a drive from Charleston back here and then to Charlotte. It was fun. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it.
I liked Costa Rica.
Costa Rica was
but
incredible, but I don't recommend.
But I also like coming home.
I do like coming home. It was not ideal having that trajectory to get home. Yes.
Well, I've enjoyed this. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about as a practitioner or your practice?
I just really appreciate the opportunity. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for having me. I think this is awesome.
I mean, so we got into this, again, because my son was diagnosed with
Yeah.
ADHD. We wanted to do something that helped other parents that kind of get this bombshell.
Yeah.
But in our position, there's only so much that we can say about best practices and what to do. So we thought by talking to a lot of doctors that we can use a podcast and use our voices to share what has worked and what doesn't work with other people. So
It's
hopefully,
really
hopefully
cool.
people have gained something from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm, if I'm happy to ever come back if you ever need or interested.
I like doing this. I mean,
Yeah.
this studio's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Greenville's amazing. So I'd
is.
love to come back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Appreciate it.